Let's talk about flexibility when lighting up your 4' by 4' grow tent. Welcome to the Hippie Geeks. Let's take a look at the light levels inside of a 4' by 4' grow tent when using both the Spider Farmer SE4500 and the SF G4500 connected together. The results may surprise you. Several folks have asked me about this very setup since we took a look at both of these lights separately, and I wanted to check it out as well since I have not chained any of their lights together in years. The results that you see later in the video will be very similar if you are connecting a mismatched pair like I am here, or two of the same light as the output from each of them is very similar to the other. If you missed those individual videos of us unboxing each of the lights, I will make sure to leave links to those videos in the description below. First up, we are going to take a look at the light levels with both the SE4500 and SF G4500 hung at 12 inches above the sensor. If you look at the PAR map on the right side of the screen, I am showing where the lights are hanging in the tent with the gray boxes on each side. This is only a rough approximation, but it should give you a good idea of how I have the lights set up inside of the tent. Also, you can see how they are hanging in the tent at the beginning of this video, as I took that footage right after measuring the light levels at 48 inches above the sensor. With the lights hanging this low, we are seeing some pretty high readings in the center of the tent, with the highest reading at 1187. The light levels are going to be pretty even across the space, with the biggest drop-off being in all four of the corners. These two lights fill up the tent pretty well, but there is still a bit of a lack of coverage at this height in the tent, and you will see the corner light levels come up as the lights are raised a bit higher. With these larger lights, I never recommend hanging them this close to the plant without turning down the dial, as you will very likely burn the foliage or flowers, but I do want to include the readings so that you can easily compare them to other lights we have looked at inside of a 4' by 4' tent. Moving both lights up to 18 inches away from the sensors really evens out the light levels across the entire canopy, as the readings in the corners come up while the readings everywhere else come down a bit. At this height, you would be getting an absolutely massive amount of light across the entire canopy, and these levels may work out for growing at the very end of flower with photoperiod plants, but you will definitely want to watch the leaves and flowers to make sure that you are not seeing light burn on the leaves or crisping on the flowers, as some strains will not handle these light levels well. These lights combined were pulling 652 watts from the wall, with them turned all of the way to 100%, and we tested it at a few more light levels as well, to give you an idea of how much power they will pull from the wall at different settings. With the dial set to 80, the lights were pulling 533 watts from the wall. When we moved them to 60 on the dial, the lights were pulling 394 watts. With the dial set to 40, the lights were pulling 264 watts from the wall. Moving the setting down to 20 on the dial brought the power draw to 139 watts, and finally setting it to 11% on the dial showed that the lights were pulling 83 watts from the wall. These are all pretty great power numbers, and as expected are pretty double of what a single light was pulling as they are combined now. Next up, we are going to move the lights to 24 inches above the sensor, and in the center of the tent, we are going to see just over 860 PAR. While it is going to be between 560 and 640 PAR around the edges of the space, this would be a really great spot to hang the light for a lot of the things that folks are going to typically be growing in a tent like this, especially with being able to dim the light to your desired level as well. We did a lot of measurements with the light dimmed, which is what the PAR X numbers that you see are for. With the light hanging at 24 inches like this, and the center PAR level at just over 860 with the light turned all the way up, the way to figure out what the levels would be at a different setting is to multiply the PAR reading by the PAR X number that is the closest to the setting that you want. Let's say that we have the light set to 60 on the dial, then we would multiply 866 by the PAR X number, which for 60 would be 0.63, giving us 546 PAR. You can do that with any of the readings on these charts, and that should get you pretty close to the right PAR level. Now that I have moved the light up to 30 inches above the sensor, we are seeing a maximum of 801 PAR in the center of the tent, with the light levels staying pretty constant between 550 and 602 in the corners of the tent. One thing that I really like about using two lights like this is that you are still getting really great light levels across the entire space, but you also get the flexibility of hanging the lights at different levels if you need to. You would have the ability of having taller plants on one side of the tent, while being able to do smaller plants or even starts on the other side. One thing that I have realized as time has passed and we have grown more and more things inside of tents is just how important flexibility in your grow space can be. Just giving yourself options can be such a relief, and I love the flexibility that multiple lights gives you inside of a tent, especially with how easy it is to control them both when you have them chained together like this. I just connected the cable, and with one set to master and the other as slave, it just worked and was super easy to control. It is a bit more of a pain to hang two separate lights rather than one, but it is actually pretty easy to do when the lights weigh as little as these two do, and there is actually enough space in between them that you can squeeze in there to raise and lower them pretty easily. Moving the light up to 36 inches above the sensor, we are still seeing some pretty incredible light levels across the entire space. At this hanging height, I would usually recommend not having the light at this height, but moved lower with the light dim to get you to the par levels you want. The levels that we are seeing even at this height are still very usable for any stage of a grow. From an energy use standpoint, you are still better off hanging the light lower and just dimming it to save power. With this much light, you can still grow very well with the light this far above the canopy, while still having a ton of space to work around the plants. It can be a real pain to squeeze between the canopy of the plants and the light when it is hung really close, but with 3 feet between the light and the plants, you can really get in there to work on them if you need to. As I mentioned earlier, it is just really nice to have options when growing, and this particular setup really looks like it is going to do that. Finally, with the light hung up at 48 inches above the sensor, we are still looking at 611 par in the center area of the tent, with between 423 and 467 in the far corners. These are actually really decent numbers considering how far from the sensor the light is at this point, but really you shouldn't be hanging the light this far from whatever you are growing, just move it closer and reduce the power level on the dial. The only real exception to that is if you are trying to absolutely minimize the amount of heat that is actually on your plants, as keeping it this far away will keep the plants as cool as possible. We have had a lot of questions from folks in really hot and humid climates on how to give their plants the best chance at thriving in the heat, and that means reducing the heat in the tent as much as possible. Move the light up as high as you can, have a ton of airflow, and hopefully run the lights at night to take advantage of the cooler temperatures. However, as I just mentioned when the light was at 36 inches, these light levels are actually really incredible, and you could easily grow just about anything at these light levels even with the light hung so far above the canopy. Most folks do not need to have 4 feet above the canopy, however, but if you started out with the light at full blast at this height and just let the plants grow up into the space, they would naturally get increasing light levels, which could work out really well over the course of a grow, and is something that I have done in the past. If you want to check out the Spider Farmer SE4500, the SF G4500, or any of their other gear for yourself, make sure to click on the link to their website in the video description down below and use the discount code GEEKS at checkout to get 8% off your entire order.